I may welcome you to this video tutorial, which is titled Quality Criteria and Characteristics of Research Papers in Social Sciences. The aim is to give you an understanding and a framework of what is expected from you when you write a research paper. Or in other words, what makes a good research paper. And I'm not referring only to articles that you want to publish in a journal. I also include bachelor thesis, master thesis, or your doctoral thesis. Here, I can only tell you something about social sciences. I can't tell you anything about engineering, IT, or disciplines as such. Now, social sciences. I know that you can fiercely argue about what falls under the category of social sciences. I have a very broad understanding here. So social sciences comprise of all the subdisciplines where you have research that is, in the broadest sense, set in some social context. Meaning I include disciplines as business administration, sociology, or psychology in social sciences. But now, let's get started. What are the quality criteria of research papers? First of all, research, academic research, is a wonderful thing because it's entirely free. You can do whatever you like. You're completely independent, or at least you should be completely independent. However, not everything you do that is free is research. If you are able to dance your name, happy days, it's absolutely free, but it's hardly research. Therefore, there are some structures, some rules that you should follow. If you understand them, then you can break them and have your individual way when conducting research. And this framework, I would like to present you now. What are we going through? First of all, I would like to show you what are the quality criteria of research papers in general. Secondly, I want to show you the typical structure of a research paper. And that comes from the idea as soon as you have structured a problem, it is nearly solved. Then it is the research questions and the topic of your research paper. So the objective, what do you want to find out? And then 4, 5, and 6, these sections, I will go through the quality criteria of theory-based research, then empirical research, first quantitative research, and then qualitative research. And finally, to conclude this tutorial, how are research papers evaluated, and we will come back with this to section 1, quality criteria of research papers in general. Now, let's start with this. What are the quality criteria? What is research about? It is in the name. You have to find something new. You have to find out something new. You have to generate new knowledge. Otherwise, research wouldn't make any sense. This knowledge has to be generalized. In the academic world, research is not finding out something for one company or for just one person. That is not research, not academic research. These findings have to be generalized for an industry, for a group of people, for some population. So you have to come to generalized findings. The next point, you need to have or to apply some method. And this method has to be transparent, or you have to describe your method transparently. And your method needs to be tested. That means you cannot come out with new findings out of nothing. You have to show the way how you came to your new findings. These findings have to be conclusive. You can think of this. There's no other option or no other deduction that is possible based on your data. It has to be conclusive and a clear answer. That is how the world looks like. So conclusive results, the meaning of, based on your assumptions and your data, there's no other conclusion possible. Finally, the research topic you're dealing with has to be comprehensively, in other words, exhaustively covered. Meaning, amongst others, all of the literature, all of the theories, all of the definitions that are within your research topic. You have to cover them and you have to deal with them. Then it is comprehensive or exhaustive. To sum it up, a good research paper, a good bachelor, master, doctoral thesis shows that there are new findings. These findings can be generalized. There's a method, it's clearly described, can be tested, can be reapplied. You've come to conclusive results and you have dealt with the theory, the literature, and all of the rest comprehensively or exhaustively. Let's come to the second point, the structure of a research paper. I said earlier, as soon as a problem is structured, and there can be in the private world, the work world, wherever you have a problem, as soon as you've structured this problem, it is basically solved and makes things much easier. I also said you're entirely free in research, but I strongly recommend you use a proven structure and look at articles in journals. You will always find this basic structure. An introduction, theory, and state of research are presented, so all the literature that's there. Then you have the research questions. Quite possibly you developed a hypothetical model. You show the method that you apply, you show the results, and then you discuss these results. What I'm doing here is showing you the basic structure. There are disciplines where the sections are named differently. I want to give you an example. Here's a typical structure or a typical table of content of a paper that's published in a psychology journal. There you have the introduction. That includes the theory, the state of research, and the research question. At the end of this section, you have normally a subsection with research questions or hypothesis. This section 1 will cover all of the three parts that I've shown you on the left side on the basic structure. And then it goes on methods, results, discussion. So what I want to come to is, or what I want to explain to you now is the basic structure, not how you have to exactly, literally name your sections. But let's come to this structure, and I would like to show you what comes in each section. I hope I can also clarify the structure and why this structure makes sense. Here I use the example of quantitative research. You can apply this structure to virtually all of other methods you apply. Qualitative research, and it's even possible with research that's just based on literature and or secondary data. First, let's go to the introduction and what do you put in there. Brief introduction of the research topic. You will point out your central research question, or in other words, your overall goal. What is your research leading to? What do you want to find out? Just on a very, say, abstract level, so that the reader knows what to expect in the next sections. With regard to the reader should understand what, or should know what to expect. It may help if you give an overview. What are the following sections? So what comes in theory, research questions, method, and so forth. Now, theory and state of research. Here again, quantitative research, and that means you have to conceptualize all of the constructs that you will examine later empirically. And of course, you have to integrate these constructs into existing theories. You can also say conceptualizing, lovely word, defining. You have to define all the constructs you're dealing with. So for instance, you examine work satisfaction and organizational commitment. Then of course, you need to have a subsection about job satisfaction, another subsection about organizational commitment. Furthermore, and that is what you definitely can't forget, is you have to point out the state of research. That is normally empirical research. You will only find this in journal articles, or virtually only find this in journal articles. So what did other researchers found out? In our example, about job satisfaction, about organizational commitment, how are these related? From the state of research, you can at least implicitly deduce the research gap. So you can point out the point to what we know the word, and then the research gap is what's beyond, what is knowledge that we do not know yet. So the research gap. And from this research gap, there comes the research questions. So you deduce the research questions, meaning what is your objective, what is your goal, what is it you want to find out from the research gap. And if possible, you can also deduce here a theoretical or hypothetical model. Back to our example, job satisfaction and organizational commitment. A research model could be, does job satisfaction, or the research question will be, does job satisfaction influence organizational commitment? And you can draw this, and you can put a graphic in with a bubble, job satisfaction, with a bubble, organizational commitment, an arrow between them, and that will be your hypothetical model. In the next section, section 4, you will describe your method. In a quantitative research study, you have to show your research design. How did you conduct your research? Was it an online questionnaire? Was it a written questionnaire? Was it an experiment? What did you do? You describe your sample, normally by socio-demographic variables like gender, age, and so forth. Furthermore, and that is what I personally think the more interesting part, you describe your measurement instruments. How did you measure the constructs of your theory you developed, your model you developed, or of your research questions? And that is related to the theory section. In the theory section, you have defined, you have conceptualized all of the constructs you're now empirically examining. Here you say, how are you examining empirically? How are you measuring these constructs? And depending on the discipline, normally you should state how you analyze your data here. Then coming to the next section, section 5, you present your empirical results and a neutral, if you will, objective point of view way. And finally, in the discussion, You discuss the results. What implications do these results have for the real world, if you will, and for the academic world? Finally, you will point out, or you have to point out, what were the limitations of your research and what other research projects should follow because of the limitations and because of the great results you came to. So that is the basic structure, and in nearly all of the cases you can apply this structure. There are always exceptions, but normally that is what I recommend you should go for. Now, a very central point, of course, is your research questions. So I would like to dedicate a special section here, and let's get on with this. So why are research questions of such a high relevance? Because they define the goal of your research. They say, what do I want to find out? And they determine in the end, the quality of your research paper is determined, amongst other things, if you have answered your research questions conclusively. That means you came to new knowledge. You produced new knowledge, your findings. They defined what is the objective by the research questions. Furthermore, of course, the research questions, you need to be able to apply a reliable method to be able to answer your research questions. So that means, or from these two aspects, what follows out of this? Firstly, your research questions have to be conclusively and comprehensively deduced from theory and state of research. So from the literature that is existing, you have to deduce your research questions conclusively and comprehensively. The research questions themselves have to be presented in a differentiated way, so you have normally more than one research question. I will show you in a moment how I recommend you structure your research questions. And your research questions have to be precise. They have to be clearly answered. When you go to qualitative research, they're rather open. When you go to quantitative research, it's sort of a yes-no word. Yes, there is an influence. No, there's not an influence. Yes, there is a correlation. No, there's not a correlation. Simplifying the things, but I hope you get an idea. And of course, we'll also come to this, research questions might be substituted by hypothesis. We'll come to this later. As I'm precise and just mentioned this, they have to be clearly answered. Now, as I said just a minute ago, how do I recommend you structure research questions? So, quite often you have a central research question, perhaps 2 or 3, but you have an overall topic, overall objective you want to go to. To reach this goal, you have to, quite often, not necessarily, but quite often, you have subordinated goals, or if you will, the central research question is similar to strategic goal, whilst the subordinated research questions are similar to operational goals. So to answer this central research question, you need to answer these more precise and particular subordinated research questions. What I want to come to, what I strongly recommend, is you have a hierarchical structure of research questions. And of course, for the subordinated research questions, you can use hypothesis. And here I will go a bit more into detail in the section of this course when it comes to quantitative research. Now, this is how research questions should look like. But how do you get to these? And I recommend a circular process. And perhaps first of all, what I recommend is this is what you should do at the start of your project. Before you do any writing of your thesis, of the manuscript for your article, do this. You set the basis here, and if this basis, this foundation is good, your overall project in the end, your article or your thesis will be good. You just need to work cleanly and thoroughly. But if this fails, if your research questions are not top notch, then the whole thing will not work out. So when you start a project, a research project, you have an idea. Normally that is not worked out in every detail. So you have an idea. That means, first of all, you go here to the second step and you look at the theoretical basis, and you also look at the state of research. So the idea becomes more clear and more differentiated. You also need to check, can I actually do this from a methodology point of view? Can I measure my constructs? Can I come to clear results? And then you can sort of do fine-grain planning or formulation of your research questions. And again, you go through this process. Research questions are a bit more worked out in detail, but not perfect. Look again, what does the theory say? What does the state of research say? Can I do this from a methodology point of view? And research questions become better and more precise and potentially more differentiated. After you're satisfied and you have a set of research questions, most likely in a hierarchical order, as I've shown you on the slide before, happy days, and you can start to bring a research project to life. Now, let's come to the research or quality criteria of theory-based research, and then later in the following sections of this tutorial, quantitative research and qualitative research. But now, theory-based research. First of all, you should be aware where you need theory-based research. So, of course, if you only work solely, if your whole research project is solely based on literature, then this applies. On a side note, that is not an easy one, especially if you go in for a thesis, bachelor, master, or doctoral thesis. I recommend, personal recommendation, do some empirical stuff. And there, in empirical papers, theory is not unimportant. Theory is quite very important. Of course, the theoretical part, if you remember the structure, section 2, theory and state of research, there you also apply theory-based research. What are you doing with theory-based research? Normally, not necessarily, but in most cases, what you want to do is you want to develop own definitions and theories or models. What are the two main quality criteria when you're doing that? So you have to deal with all of the academically recognized definitions and theories. So all major definitions and theories that are existing within your area of research or your research topic have to be covered. And of course, it's not only defining things, conceptualizing things. You also have to point out, don't forget the state of research, what are the related empirical findings. And that means here, theory part of theory-based research, especially the general quality criteria of working comprehensively or exhaustively, is key. Now, one could think, I can't handle this. There's so much out there. There's so many articles, so many publications. Give you a hint or a recommendation. You should be strictly oriented towards your research questions. Only deal with existing research and existing theories that are relevant for your research questions. Everything that is not sort of directly related to your research questions should not be in your article or in your thesis. So you have to work comprehensively, but strict orientation on your objectives, on your research questions. And therefore, on a side note, what I recommend is, and I mean this literally, well, as soon as you have your research questions, print them out, hang them over your desk while working, and everything you do is directed towards them. How do you do this? To clarify a bit more, as I said, mostly your objective is to find own theories or own definitions. So you point out all of the relevant definitions that are existing, or theories, theory 1, 2, 3, and so forth. All of these theories have to be backed by a quote. In this context, I'm often asked, especially by students, how many sources do I have in a thesis, an assignment, or so on? There are lots of rules of thumb, but the only rule that is existing, the theory part, everything you write down there has to be backed by a quote. And there's no shame in having a quote after each sentence. So there's no such thing as the bibliography, the references at the end, have too many sources. Such thing does not exist. Back here, so you pointed out these are theories, these are the definitions, and from these you deduce your own theory or definition that is used in your research project, in your article, on your thesis. Of course, the last one here, the deduction, there you do not need to have a quote because you have it deduced, and that means, again, think back on the general quality criteria, it has to be conclusively deduced from existing literature. Now, what kind of literature can you use in academic research? So, I'm generally speaking, to make it simple, publications, academic publications that adhere to the same quality criteria as I'm showing you here, they're fine. Perhaps sort of, again, the rule of thumb for the common world, as soon as you can buy a journal in a corner shop, don't use it. But that is, again, the rule of thumb. So, same quality criteria as you find here, meaning they come to something new, have a reliable method, they dealt with the topic they have exhaustively, came to conclusive results, so the same that I've defined here. And to show you what you can't cite, there's all this popular science stuff, dictionaries, the internet. Doesn't matter how good it is, what is standing there. You can't cite this. That is not acceptable. But there are exceptions as usual. So, what you can do if you find empirical studies, not in an academic paper, but they have a transparent and reliable method, why not? Or if you want to show the general development of a society, of a company, or so on, then of course you cannot just say this, but you need some sources, and there the internet or a newspaper might be okay. For your actual work, or for your actual academic work, by defining something, by working out a theory, that is not fine. There you need proper academic sources. Next, let's come to quantitative research. Here again, first of all, what helps is to be clear about what is the objective of quantitative research. And here, think of the classical definition of measuring. What you want to do is you assign numbers to empirical objects or characteristics. Think of a questionnaire, an online questionnaire. You have a question, what is your gender, male, female, and what have you. And then in the background, the system, the questionnaire, online questionnaire tool, will write 1 for male, a 2 for female. So you have assigned numbers to an empirical object or characteristic. Or you have a rating scale. Let's go to this example here. How satisfied are you with your work? Please indicate on a scale from 1 to 6. 1 not at all, 6 completely. And then whatever the participant of your survey marks, you have a 5, a 4, whatever, assigning numbers to empirical objects or characteristics. What we want to do or achieve through this is we want to have a simplified image of reality. Whatever reality is, but that will be a different topic. So we want to have a simplified image of reality, and this means we're testing a theory through this simplified image. For instance, I had this example before. I will come back here to this example. We want to test our theory that work satisfaction has an impact on organizational commitment. Because of the numbers, because of the data we've collected, the analysis we conducted, we can say yes or no, of course with a certain probability. So what we want to do is we want to draw a simplified image of reality, and through this we want to test theories. And here in the middle of the slide you find a theory or an hypothetical model. And from literature we know work satisfaction might have an influence or an impact on organizational commitment. So that is our theory that we've developed, our model. Now we can have a research question. The research question is, does work satisfaction have an influence on organizational commitment? We can also formulate an hypothesis. Hypothesis would be in this case, work satisfaction has an influence on organizational commitment. So that means, if you remember what I've told you about the research questions, they need to be clearly answered. And here I can say with this research question, yes or no. Yes, there is an impact. No, there's no impact. Or with the hypothesis, I can say yes, the hypothesis is okay, or no, I have to reject this hypothesis. So sort of a black and white yes or no word when you come to quantitative research. What you do, as generally speaking, it doesn't matter if you have research questions or hypothesis. Both you need to deduce from theory, and I personally would say use whatever suits you best. I, for example, to this date, I haven't used hypothesis at all because for whatever reason, and I don't know myself, I do not like them. Because in the end, it makes no difference. You have to do the same analysis anyway. If I have a black and white yes and no research question or an hypothesis, what? Who cares? have to do the same analysis anyway. Now, one advice, and I recommend you take this seriously, is use a statistic software. So standard in the academic world at the moment is mainly R, and R is the coolest thing. And I recommend you use this. There are other softwares out there. R is for free. It's not self-explanatory. It's a bit nasty, but you can do everything with it, and it has some other advantages. And what I definitely recommend that you're not doing is use something like Excel. Excel is a great tool, but it's hard to use for statistical analysis, and normally you will have mistakes in it in the end. Now, two more things I want to come to. That is the relationship between the theory section and the methodology section. One important thing is you cannot come up with measurement stuff out of nothing. You have, before you say in the methodology section how you measure your constructs, these constructs need to be conceptualized in the theory section. Perhaps in this context, what definitely helps you, all established theories that you put together, or nearly all established theories, also have a validated questionnaire. So there's no shame in using a validated questionnaire and combining validated questionnaires to come to the results, or to conduct the data collection and the analysis for your research project. So nothing comes out of nothing. So again, everything you measure has to be theoretically conceptualized before. Now, one thing that is not of the least importance is the sample size. First of all, let me say the sample size depends on your research questions and the framework of your research project. I cannot tell you, you need 200, you need 500, you need 700, or whatever participants. But I would give you two sort of rules of thumb, or one approach how to establish the sample size, and one rule of thumb for representative survey and for an exploratory survey. So, representative survey. For instance, you want to find out how the British people evaluate XY. So you need to have a picture or an image of the British people, but you will ask not all of them, but just, in this case, normally you would ask sort of 1,067 or 2,000 and a bit. So, how many you have to ask, that depends on the population, how many Brits are there, your significance level, meaning with what percentage should your results match the results of the British people, or the actual values of the British people. So the rule of thumb is 5%, which means you have to turn this around. It's statistically not entirely correct what I'm telling now, but to give you an understanding, you have to turn this around. 59%. So again, statistically not 100% correct, but with a probability of 95%, you can say that your results are matching the actual true values of the British people. And you have a sampling error, which means you will never have the exact value in your sample like in the population, or now, so British example, you won't have exact, in your sample you won't have exact the numbers or the results as the British people's true thinking or values are. But with this example, 5%, 3%, we have a population in the UK of roughly 68 million. You can calculate this, and then you would have to ask 1,067 people, meaning you have 1,067 net sample size of 1,067, meaning 1,067 completely filled out questionnaires. That is for a representative survey. In academic research, you do not always need a representative survey. You can also go for rather exploratory design, meaning does X generally has an influence on Y? So, for instance, our example before, does job satisfaction has an impact on organizational commitment? I just want to know if this is generally the case. Then you do not necessarily need a representative sample. And then a rule of thumb, that is just a rule of thumb, is you should at least have 200 to 300 participants who completed the questionnaire. Normally, the more the better. So there's no shame in having higher numbers in your sample. That's just a rule of thumb, then it is okay. And the emphasis is at least 200 to 300 rule of thumb. Now, finally, what is in the methodology section? I've hinted this before, but what you normally put in here, depending on the discipline, perhaps in slightly different order or slightly different subsections. For instance, psychology. But you can also, quite often, or normally, you can use this structure. You have two subsections, the research design, the measurement. The research design, this subsection, you have the procedure. When did you collect your data? How was it done? Was it online, written, questionnaire, and so on? You state your sample size, and you describe your sample by socio-demographic variables. Normally, socio-demographic characteristics. So how many men were in your sample, how many women, how old were they, what occupation did they have, what have you. That is what you do here in the first subsection. Then there's a second subsection. So, from a point of the reader, have a look. What is the reader interested in? It is the content of the questionnaire. So, what were the constructs? And quite often you do not measure constructs by one item, so just one question, but multiple items, then name them. Refer to measurement instruments, validated measurement instruments that you might be using. Describe the type of the questions. So, is it a rating scale? Is it a continuous rating scale? What is it? So that the reader knows this is how the questionnaire looked like or how an experiment was conducted. So this is how the questionnaire looks like or looked like. He needs to know. So you normally do not put the questionnaire in there, but you describe it. The questionnaire itself can be in the appendix. Also, you state how you conduct your data analysis. What are you using? T-test, regressions, path modeling, whatever analysis you use. Two things I want to point out. As I've said before, disciplines may slightly differ from these two subsections. Principally, you have the same content in the methodology section anyway. And what is very important, so textbook style explanation of statistical procedures. That is not adequate. You're writing a research paper. This is read by academics and researchers. You can expect from them that they know standard statistical analysis procedures. So you should not explain a t-test or a regression analysis. You have to state that you use this to analyze the data, but you do not explain this in a textbook style. Now, let's come to the qualitative research. What quality criteria can you find there? First of all, again, what is the objective of qualitative research? Again, here is more, and you have more approaches. But what are you normally aiming for? You want to discover psychological or social types, structures, things that are typical for people. And from these types or structures, you want to develop a model or theory. That is your aim. So, out of observations, including interviews, of course, you want to develop a model, a theory. There are lots of methods that you find in qualitative research. Two of the typical ones, and probably the most used methods in qualitative research, are group discussions and qualitative interviews. I want to point out that an expert interview is a sub-form of a qualitative interview. The only difference being that with a qualitative interview, a classic qualitative interview, you want to find out the inner state, the feelings, the motivation, the emotions, the attitudes of a person. An expert interview, from the expert, you want to know how he or she sees things from his role, not as a person himself or herself, but in his role as an expert. So what is important and what I want to show you, what are the characteristics of qualitative research? Ideal, typically, you can distinguish between the data collection side and the data analysis side. That is not 100% clear, this distinction, but ideal typically, and for the purposes of clarifying what are the characteristics of qualitative research, it makes sense from my point of view. So let's start to the left with the data collection side. So in comparison to quantitative research, you have open research questions in qualitative research. So you ask how, why, for what. That is typical questions for qualitative research. Sometimes the research questions can only be specified during the research process. So it can go in some other directions that you have actually planned. The data collection is normally not standardized and structured at all. Some qualitative researchers say you have to go into a qualitative research project completely open, sort of let the wind, it's not the wind, let the research, the data collection and the analysis take you wherever it leads you. I like to differ because you always have some sort of structure and standardization, but it's not as clear. And you can see this in the questionnaire or interview guideline, which is very open. The questions are open in this questionnaire or interview guideline, and it's not a strict order of questions. What you find in qualitative research, especially with regards to group discussions and qualitative interviews, is that there's an interaction between the researcher and the participant. Something you want to avoid in quantitative research. So you need to always have in mind when you're dealing with qualitative research, also later when you come to the analysis of qualitative data, there is an interaction. You can't avoid this. Otherwise, how to conduct the interview? Not possible. Very important. So in quantitative research, it's rather the research object you're interested in. So how is the attitude? How is the motive? That is quantitative. Qualitative, the focus is on the research subject, on the participant, and on their feelings. what are their motives? How are they connected? So it is the three statements and their, if you will, natural world of feelings and thoughts and behaviors. On the side of the data analysis, your objective is to gain a deep and comprehensive understanding of the world of your participants. How do they see the world? How are they behaving there? What impact has it on them? Such things. So a comprehensive understanding. And this also means, perhaps you can see, you conduct interviews. That is a very demanding process and it takes time. The analysis takes time too. So you're asking not so many participants, way less participants than in quantitative research. We'll come to this in a moment. That means you cannot talk of statistical representativity. In qualitative research, you find the term content representativity, which goes together with a point I've mentioned before. A deep and comprehensive, sort of full-on, all-including understanding of the world of the participants. How you do this is, you have your interviews conducted, you have transcribed them, meaning you have a transcription that is literal, and you have flexible systems of codes or categories to find the meaning behind what your participants said, your interview partner said, and how these, if you will, meanings statements are interrelated. And again, what we want to find out in our interpretation and our understanding of the situation, of the qualitative, understanding of the qualitative data, all details should be integrated. Virtually all details should be integrated in this process of understanding what people have told me in qualitative research. Now, again, the sample size. As I just mentioned, I will come to this, and how many interviews should you conduct. Again, like with quantitative research, it depends on your framework of your research and your research objectives, how many you have to ask. And here it also depends a bit on the qualitative approach from methodology side, but that will be a different topic. So I can only give you rules of thumb for a minimum sample size. Group discussions. I recommend do at least 3 groups and normally have 8 to 12 participants in. Not more, not less. If you have less, there's not really a discussion and you don't get enough different perspectives on a topic, on your research topic. If you have more than 12, you have some that will duck and they're away and you won't get any answers from them. And again, there's no proper discussion that gets into flow. For qualitative interviews, at least 10 to 12. That is my recommendation. Again, it's a rule of thumb. Depends on your research project, but with 10 to 12 interviews, you're normally fine. And be aware, on a side note, if you conduct these interviews, in each project you find 1 or 2 interviews, you know during the interview, thanks a bunch, I can throw this away. You have some know-it-all or whatever people who will tell you nonsense. So you conduct the interview, you know you can forget about this. That is normal. Coming back to qualitative research. Qualitative research is repeatedly or regularly every few years under massive attack and criticism. Of course, it is quite often deemed as being not objective. There's no objectivity. As you see, as there's a dialogue between researcher and participant, it's easy to criticize qualitative research. But qualitative research has its right. The important thing is you should base this on a proven method. Qualitative research is nothing like, oh, I'm a people person. I just ask a few guys and then I know how the world looks like. Never do this. What you need to do is proper method, proper approach. I can refer you in this context to the grounded theory or the qualitative content analysis by Myring. These are two main approaches. Deal with this before you do qualitative research. Look at the methodology books first, if you haven't done yet. What is very important is, please think back. You need a method that is understandable and is reliable. General quality criteria of research papers. That is in every methodology approach that is important, but it's especially important with qualitative research. So you need to describe step by step and very precise and in every detail, how did you develop your questionnaire, your interview guideline? How did you conduct your qualitative interviews or your group discussions? And how did you analyze your qualitative data? It has to be decided, it has to be described step by step in detail so that no one can criticize you. You came up with findings and results out of nothing because you felt this way. Very important. And the precondition for the analysis, or actually making people comprehend and understand your analysis, is the literal transcription of the interviews or the group discussions. You won't publish these transcriptions. Don't do this. But you need a literal transcription to properly analyze qualitative data. All the rest will not work. So now let's come to the end. I know a circle is closing. At the start, I've shown you the quality criteria of research papers in general, and then I went a bit more into detail. Now, how to evaluate research papers. It is the same criteria as I've shown you before. But you have here some checkup questions. So ask yourself, does my research paper come to new findings or new knowledge? Does my research paper come to generalizable findings? Did I apply a comprehensible and testable method? Did I come to conclusive results? No other deduction is possible or conclusion. And did I cover my topic or the area of my research questions in theory and in the empirical part, if you do empirical research, comprehensively and exhaustively? So again, always ask yourself, new findings, are they generalized? Do I have a reliable method? Are my results conclusive? And did I deal with everything comprehensively or exhaustively? If you've done this, happy days, and you have a top research paper. Now, I say thank you for watching and listening in here, and I wish you good luck with your next research project. May it be an article that you publish in a journal, your bachelor, master, or doctoral thesis.